Inside Spring Framework, there is a very important concept with the name Bean Scopes. Let's try to understand what is this new concept. With the knowledge that we have gained so far inside this course, we understand Bean is an object that is going to be managed by the Spring IOC container. While creating a Bean, my Spring IOC container, first it needs to create the object of a class. Once the object of the class is created, it is going to be pushed into the Spring context for the management of its lifecycle. Such objects are called as beans. This is all the information that we already know, but the new information that I want to share is around the scopes. While we are trying to define the beans inside our application, we can also provide scope information. Based upon this scope information, we can control how and when Spring creates a new instance of the bean. Inside Spring Framework, there are 5 different scopes available. Singleton is the default scope. When you are trying to create a bean by using stereotype annotation or by using bean annotation, by default, every bean inside your application, they're going to have this singleton scope. If needed, we can override these default scope by switching to the other scopes like prototype, request, session, and application. These last 3 scopes, they are applicable only if you are building the web applications with the help of Spring Framework. In the coming sections, we are going to build web applications with the help of Spring and Spring Boot. During the same time, I'm going to explain these 3 scopes. For now, inside this section, let's focus on understanding what is this singleton scope and what is this prototype scope. To show you the demo around the bean scopes, I have created a new Spring Maven project with the name example 9. Inside this only, I'm going to make all the code changes related to the bean scopes. Let me delete these 2 beans that I have, followed by I'm going to create a new Java class inside the beans package. The class name is my service. Let's imagine I'm trying to create a bean inside my service layer, which is going to have a lot of business logics in the form of Java methods. On top of this class, I'm going to mention @component annotation, followed by I'm going to create a constructor. Inside this constructor, I'm going to have a system.out.println statement saying that my service created. Now let me go to the Spring main class. Here we have some compilation errors. Let me try to fix them. Instead of loading the bean of type vehicle, I'm going to load the bean of my service.class. On the left hand side as well, I'm going to mention my service, and variable name I'm going to mention as service1, followed by I'll try to copy the same line one more time, and I'm trying to mention the variable name as service2. Basically here what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the bean of type my class couple of times, followed by I'm going to have a system.out.println, and inside this println I'm going to compare both these objects service1 and service2 with the help of double equal. Here what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to compare the hash code of these 2 objects that I have fetched from the Spring context. Let's see what is the output we are going to get. Let me execute this program. Always try to execute the program by using these icons. Don't try to use these shortcuts, because sometimes you may end up executing the Spring main class present inside the other examples like example 5, example 8. And with that, you may get some unexpected output. Whereas if you use these icons, you're always going to make sure that you are starting the Spring main class that you have open. Let me select this debug option. Inside my console, I got a statement my service created one time only. This statement is getting printed from the constructor of the my service class. Along with this constructor statement, I am also getting the Boolean value true as an output. Whatever system.out.println we have written here, this is trying to print the true value because the outcome of this objects comparison is true. When this is going to return true value, when the hash code of these 2 objects is same, which means both the service1 and service2, they point to the same object reference. Even if you try to load the bean 1000 number of times, Spring IOC container, it is always going to give you the same bean object reference. It is not going to create 1000 different objects. Instead, it is always going to give you the same bean with the same object reference. This is the default behavior, and this behavior is possible because by default behind the scenes, Spring is using singleton scope. We can also define the singleton scope specifically by mentioning @scope annotation. To this @scope annotation, we can either pass singleton value. Make sure all the letters are in lowercase letter, or we can also invoke bean definition dot scope underscore singleton. If you open this constant, this is how it is going to look like. Let me open this constant as well, and this is the value behind the scenes it is using. Instead of mentioning all these constants, you can directly mention the singleton value as well. Mentioning the singleton scope is always optional because anyways by default Spring Framework is going to consider the scope as singleton. Let's try to understand the reason on why all the beans are marked as singleton by default. We saw the behavior of singleton. With singleton, every time if someone is asking the Spring IOC container to give a particular bean, it is always going to give you the same object reference. This is done intentionally because usually inside any web application, it is going to receive the request from the client applications, and simultaneously thousands of different users, they are going to access the client application. From the client application, the request will forward to the backend application. To handle the request from each end user, the backend server or the backend application, it is going to create separate thread. So if your application is being used by 1,000 different users, all those users, they are going to get 1,000 different threads handling their request on the backend side. Let's imagine if all these 1,000 threads, they have a dependency on the bean my service. Why they have this dependency? Because all these threads, they want to execute the business logic present inside this my service class. You may have 100 different methods inside this my service class having thousands of lines of business logic. When all these multiple threads approaches the Spring IOC container to get the bean reference, it is going to give you the same object reference instead of creating different objects for each thread. The reason is very simple. Spring IOC container, it don't want to create different beans for different threads for performance reasons. If an application is being used by thousands of threads, and if IOC container end up creating 1,000 different beans for each of the thread, then it is going to create some performance problems. Instead, if the IOC container pass on the same bean definition for all the threads, it is going to be super quick and there won't be any problem as well. Because the business logic that we want to execute for all these thousands of threads is always going to be the same. Developers will never write business logic which is going to be different from thread to thread or from user to user. That's why by default inside the Spring Framework, the beans are going to be created with the singleton scope just to make sure there are no performance related issues. Inside this slide, I have mentioned the same example that we have discussed. As I said before, mentioning the singleton scope is completely optional. Even if you don't mention, the beans, they are going to be created with the default scope of singleton scope. Here, there is an important point which I want to discuss in detail. There is a singleton design pattern available inside the industry. With the help of this singleton design pattern, usually developers, they'll ensure only one instance of an object is available inside entire application. That is also what we are trying to do with the help of Spring Singleton Scope. Spring Singleton Scope also maintains one instance only, but there is a small difference between the singleton design pattern and singleton scope. The Spring IOC container, it is always going to maintain a single instance of bean per bean definition within the Spring context. With this setup, we are trying to create only a single bean of type myService. But we can also use @bean definition with the multiple methods. For example, think like I have two different methods which are going to return the myService bean. In this scenario, my Spring IOC container will create two different instances even though the default scope of the bean is singleton. The reason is the developer defined the bean definition couple of times. Always singleton scope, it is going to maintain one instance per bean definition within the Spring context. You need to be very careful about this only when you are trying to create the beans with the help of @bean annotation. In the case of stereotype annotations, of course, it is not possible for a developer to create multiple bean definitions. They can only create a single definition. I also highlighted an important note here saying that always use the singleton when you need a single shared instance across the entire application, such as a service class managing business logic like caching or some validations or any other business logic. I hope you are clear about this singleton scope.